The glass door of Morrison & Associates' notary office felt heavier than it should have when I pushed it open that cold November morning. I'd been awake since 4, rehearsing this moment in my mind, running through every possible scenario. But nothing could have prepared me for the look on Diane's face when she saw me walk in. She was sitting in one of those burgundy leather chairs near the reception desk, and the second she spotted me through the glass, her arms crossed over her chest like a shield. That smile. God, that smug, self-satisfied smile that I'd seen at every family gathering for the past 32 years. The smile that said she'd already won. "Vivian," she said, drawing out my name like it tasted bitter. "I didn't think you'd actually show up. Thought you'd send one of your fancy lawyers to handle the dirty work." I didn't respond. I just kept walking, my heels clicking against the marble floor, my leather portfolio tucked under my arm. The same portfolio Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary, back when he was still healthy, still laughing at my terrible jokes over breakfast. Next to Diane sat Clifton Hargrove, her attorney. I'd done my research on him. 48 years old, graduated from some third-tier law school in Connecticut, made his career exploiting loopholes in estate disputes. He was wearing a charcoal suit that was just a bit too tight across the shoulders, and when he stood to greet me, I caught a whiff of cologne so strong it made my eyes water. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, extending his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad we could arrange this meeting. I think we can resolve this matter quickly if we're all reasonable." Reasonable. The word hung between us. I shook his hand briefly, feeling the dampness of his palm, and took the seat across from them. The receptionist, a young woman with nervous eyes, had already disappeared into the back office. She knew what was coming. This whole office knew. "I appreciate your optimism, Mr. Hargrove," I said, setting my portfolio on my lap. "Though I'm curious what you consider reasonable." He leaned back, that condescending smile still plastered on his face. "Well, Mrs. Ashford, my client has made her position quite clear. She believes the modifications to your late husband's will were made under undue influence during a period when Mr. Ashford was medically compromised. We have documentation suggesting—" "Documentation," I interrupted, my voice steady. "You mean the forged document claiming Richard promised Diane the Newberry Street property?" Diane's face flushed red. "It wasn't forged. Richard told me himself, 3 weeks before he died. He said what exactly?" I kept my eyes locked on hers. "That he was leaving you a commercial property worth $1.2 million while cutting out his own children? That sounds like Richard to you." "He felt guilty." Diane's voice rose. "Guilty for always choosing you over his own family, for letting you manipulate him into—" "Mrs. Bennett." Hargrove placed a hand on her arm, trying to reel her back in. He turned to me with what I assume he thought was a diplomatic expression. "Mrs. Ashford, emotions are running high. That's understandable. But the facts remain. Your husband altered his will just 4 months before his death, during his cancer treatment. The timing alone raises questions." I felt my jaw tighten. 4 months before Richard died, he was still sharp as a tack despite the pain. I remembered that day at our attorney's office. He'd held my hand the entire time, making jokes about estate planning being more depressing than his diagnosis. The video camera had captured every moment. Before I could respond, the door to the main office opened and Gerald Morrison walked out. He was 63, had been a notary in Boston for 35 years, and had handled at least a dozen of my real estate transactions over the past decade. His reputation was impeccable. He glanced down at the paperwork on his secretary's desk, then looked up. When his eyes met mine, I watched his expression change. The professional courtesy shifted to something close to shock. Mrs. Ashford?" His voice came out strangled, higher than normal. Is that you in person?" The entire office went silent. Even the hum of the copy machine in the corner seemed to pause. I saw Diane's smile falter, saw her eyes dart to Hargrove. The attorney's expression shifted from smug confidence to something else. Confusion, maybe, or the first hint of concern. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," I said calmly. "Yes, I thought this matter deserved my personal attention." He stammered something about being right with us, then disappeared back into his office. I could hear him making a phone call, his voice muffled through the door. Diane and Hargrove exchanged a look that I caught from the corner of my eye. The look of two people who suddenly realized they might have miscalculated. "You know him," Diane said, and it wasn't a question. Her voice had lost some of its edge. "Mr. Morrison and I have worked together for years," I replied. "He's handled the documentation for several of my properties, the Beacon Hill townhouse, the commercial space in Cambridge, that medical building in Brookline that generates $42,000 a month in rental income." I let that last detail hang. Diane had no idea about the scope of my real estate portfolio. Richard and I had built our wealth separately, deliberately. He respected my independence, never questioned my business decisions. It drove Diane crazy that her brother trusted me with everything while she couldn't even manage her own checking account. Hargrove cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm sure your business relationship with the notary is impressive, but that doesn't change the facts of this case. My client has legitimate concerns about—" "Your client withdrew $47,000 from a joint account she shared with my husband," I said, opening my portfolio. 3 days after Richard died, using documents with his signature. Would you like to explain how a dead man authorized a bank withdrawal? The color drained from Diane's face. That was... Richard told me I could use that account for emergencies. I had expenses. The funeral. The funeral that Marcus and I paid for entirely? That funeral? I pulled out the first document, a bank statement with the transaction highlighted. This emergency was a 2-week trip to Aruba, according to your credit card statements. Quite the grief response. Hargrove snatched the paper from my hand, his eyes scanning quickly. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. "This doesn't prove forgery. Power of attorney documents can be—" "There was no power of attorney," I said. Richard revoked Diane's access to that account in 2019 after she borrowed $15,000 for what she called a business investment. The investment was a timeshare in Florida that she defaulted on within 6 months. Morrison emerged from his office, his face pale. He wouldn't look at Diane or Hargrove, just gestured toward the conference room. "Why don't we all step inside?" The conference room was small, with a mahogany table and chairs that had seen better days. Morrison took his seat at the head, spreading out the paperwork Hargrove had submitted. I could see his hands shaking slightly. "Mr. Morrison," Hargrove began, trying to regain control. "As I explained on the phone, we're here to contest the validity of—" "I know why you're here, Mr. Hargrove." Morrison's voice was firm now, back to his professional tone. "But I need to inform you that Mrs. Ashford's reputation in this city is beyond reproach. I've personally witnessed her business dealings for over a decade. She's never once been involved in anything questionable." "This isn't about business dealings," Diane snapped. "This is about family, about Richard's wishes, about her manipulating my brother when he was dying." I felt something break inside me then. Not the fragile, shattered feeling she probably hoped for. Something harder. 3 years of holding back, of being diplomatic, of tolerating her insinuations at the funeral, her tearful calls to Marcus and Helena trying to turn them against me. All of it crystallized into cold, focused rage. "Your brother," I said quietly, "spent 32 years protecting you from yourself. Every failed business, every bad relationship, every time you needed money because you couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months. He gave you cash, paid your rent, covered your credit card debt. Do you know how much he gave you over the years, Diane?" She pressed her lips together, her arms still crossed. $273,000, I continued. "I found the records in his office after he died, notes in his handwriting, Diane's car payment, Diane's rent, Diane's divorce lawyer. 27 years of bailouts. And you know what he never did? "What?" she whispered. "He never told me to stop her from coming around, never complained about the money. He loved you despite everything. But he also knew you, Diane. He knew that if he left you a lump sum, you'd blow through it in 2 years and end up worse off than before. You don't know anything about... The Newberry Street property generates $96,000 a year in rental income," I cut her off. "Richard's will established a trust that pays you $2,000 a month for the rest of your life. $24,000 a year, guaranteed that you can't gamble away or lose to another con artist selling timeshares. That was love, Diane. Real love, protecting you even after he was gone." Hargrove shuffled his papers, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ashford, while that's all very touching, it doesn't address the question of mental competency when the will was modified." I opened my laptop, the one I'd been carrying in my portfolio. Morrison leaned forward, interested now. Even Diane uncrossed her arms. "You want to talk about mental competency?" I turned the screen toward them and pressed play. The video started with Richard sitting at our attorney's desk. The date stamp showed clearly, July 18th, 2022, 4 months before he died. He was thin, the cancer had stolen his weight, but his eyes were clear, alert. "This is Richard Ashford," he said to the camera, his voice weak but steady. "I'm here of sound mind and body, or as sound as stage 4 pancreatic cancer allows anyway." He smiled then, that same crooked smile I'd fallen in love with 37 years ago. I felt my throat tighten, but kept my face neutral. "I'm modifying my will today to make absolutely certain that everything I own goes to my wife, Vivian, and our children, Marcus and Helena. I know my sister Diane is going to contest this. She's probably already planning her lawsuit, knowing her." On the screen, Richard shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. Our attorney, James Chen, appeared in frame briefly, asking if he needed water. Richard waved him off. "Diane's been calling me constantly, visiting every day, talking about how I need to take care of family. What she means is she wants money. She always wants money. And I've given it to her, God knows I have. But I've also watched her destroy every opportunity, every relationship, every chance at stability. If I leave her a large sum, she'll burn through it, and then what? Then she'll have nothing." He looked directly into the camera, and I could see the pain in his eyes. Not physical pain, the emotional cost of what he was about to say. "I'm leaving Diane a trust that pays monthly, enough to live on, not enough to destroy herself with. Everything else goes to Vivian because she's the strongest, smartest, most capable person I've ever known. She'll protect our children's inheritance. She'll make sure Marcus and Helena have what they need, and she'll do it because that's who she is, not because I'm asking, because that's how she's wired." The video ended. The conference room was completely silent. I looked at Diane, saw tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. "That doesn't prove anything," she said, her voice breaking. "He was medicated. You coached him. The medical records are attached," I said, pulling another document from my portfolio. Blood work from that morning. No narcotics in his system. He'd specifically asked to be clear-headed for the signing. There are 3 witnesses. The video has metadata showing the date, time, and location. Would you like to keep going? Hargrove stood abruptly. "I need to consult with my client privately." "Sit down, Mr. Hargrove." My voice was ice. "We're not done." He looked at Morrison, who gestured for him to sit. The attorney sank back into his chair, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely worried. I pulled out the final document in my stack. "This is a report from the Massachusetts Bar Association's Disciplinary Board. Are you familiar with case number 2023 DL4477? Hargrove's face went white. It involves an attorney who falsified documents in an estate dispute in 2023, forged signatures on a codicil to make it appear the deceased had changed their mind about asset distribution. The case was sealed as part of a settlement agreement, but I have friends in the legal community who remember it quite well. I don't know what you're talking about, Hargrove said, but his voice cracked. The attorney's name was redacted in the public records, but the case details are quite specific. The law firm was Hargrove and Associates. That's your firm, isn't it? Morrison was staring at Hargrove now, his professional mask slipping into something that looked like disgust. You accepted a case based on a forged document, Mr. Hargrove. The signature analysis is in my portfolio. The handwriting expert will testify that Richard's signature on the document Diane presented was created after his death, which makes this fraud. And given your history, I imagine the Bar Association would be very interested in reopening their investigation. Diane stood up so fast, her chair tipped backward. You're lying. You're making all of this up to what, Diane? I stood too, facing her across the table. To keep money that's already legally mine? To protect my children's inheritance from their aunt who's trying to steal it? Richard left you $2,000 a month for life. That's more than he owed you, more than you deserve. And you're throwing it away because you can't stand the thought of me having what I worked my entire life to build. Her face crumpled. He was my brother. He was my husband, I said softly. And I loved him more than you'll ever understand. Morrison cleared his throat. I believe this meeting is concluded. Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Hargrove, unless you have substantial evidence to counter what Mrs. Ashford has presented, I cannot in good conscience proceed with contesting this will. Hargrove was already gathering his papers, his hands shaking. Diane just stood there, tears still streaming, her whole body trembling with anger, or grief, or both. I'll destroy you for this, she whispered. No, Diane, I said, closing my portfolio. You'll go home, you'll accept the trust Richard set up, and you'll stay away from my children, because if you don't, I'll file charges for the bank fraud, and then you won't get anything except a criminal record. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their failed scheme. Behind me, I could hear Diane sobbing and Hargrove trying to quiet her, probably already planning how to distance himself from the disaster. The cold November air hit my face when I stepped outside, and I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the adrenaline of finally standing up and fighting back. Richard would have been proud. Probably would have made some joke about me being scarier than his oncologist. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, letting the reality sink in. It was over. The harassment, the legal threats, the sleepless nights worrying about protecting what Richard and I had built. All of it finished. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. How'd it go, Mom? I smiled and typed back. I'll tell you over dinner. Bring your sister. We have a lot to celebrate. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the notary office. Through the window, I could see Diane still sitting in that conference room, Hargrove pacing beside her. They looked small from this distance, defeated, and for the first time in 3 years, since the day Richard took his last breath holding my hand, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I met Richard Ashford in 1988 at a real estate conference in Chicago. I was 25 years old, fresh out of business school, working as a junior broker for a small firm in Boston. He was 30, already running his own consulting company, and he had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the only person worth talking to. We ended up at the same networking dinner, seated across from each other by pure chance. I remember he asked me what I wanted to accomplish in 5 years, and I didn't give him the safe answer. I told him I wanted to own my own properties, build passive income streams, never depend on anyone for financial security. Most men would have found that intimidating. Richard smiled and said, Good. A woman who knows what she wants. That's rare. We were married 8 months later. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. His sister Diane was there, of course. She was 20 years old then, already on her second boyfriend that year, already showing signs of the chaos that would define her life. I remember her pulling Richard aside after the ceremony, crying about something. I found out later she'd asked him for money to cover rent she'd blown on a weekend trip to Atlantic City. Even then, he gave it to her. He always gave it to her. "She's family," he'd say when I gently suggested maybe he should let her face some consequences. "She doesn't have anyone else, Viv. Our parents are gone. I'm all she's got." I didn't push. How could I? Richard was the most generous person I'd ever met. That generosity was part of why I loved him. But over the years, I watched Diane exploit it, and I watched Richard let her. We had Marcus 2 years after we married. Helena came 3 years after that. Richard was an incredible father, patient and present in ways my own father never was. He'd come home from 12-hour workdays and still have energy to read bedtime stories, to help with homework, to coach Marcus's little league team. Meanwhile, I was building my real estate portfolio. I started small, a duplex in a transitioning neighborhood that everyone said was too risky. I renovated it myself on weekends, learning plumbing and drywall from YouTube videos because contractors were too expensive. Within a year, the rental income covered the mortgage and then some. Richard never questioned my business decisions, never suggested I should focus on being a stay-at-home mom like so many other husbands did back then. He respected my ambition. Diane, on the other hand, had opinions. Lots of them. "Must be nice," she said once at a family dinner, watching Richard and me discuss my third property purchase. "Having a husband who bankrolls your little hobby." "I bankroll my own investments, Diane," I'd replied calmly, "with income from my previous properties. That's how passive income works." She'd just smiled that tight smile and changed the subject. But I saw the resentment in her eyes, the jealousy that never quite went away. Over the years, the pattern became clear. Diane would get a new job, full of enthusiasm and promises that this time would be different. 3 months later, she'd quit or get fired for chronic lateness or creative differences with management. Then she'd call Richard, crying, explaining how she just needed a little help to get back on her feet. And Richard would transfer money every single time. "You're enabling her," I told him once, after she'd called at midnight begging for $2,000 because her electricity was about to be shut off. This was after Richard had paid her rent just 3 weeks earlier. "What am I supposed to do, Viv?" He'd looked exhausted, sitting at our kitchen table in his pajamas. "Let her sit in the dark? She's my sister." "You're supposed to let her learn that actions have consequences," I'd said. "You're supposed to stop rescuing her so she can figure out how to rescue herself." But he couldn't. That was the thing about Richard. His capacity for love was boundless, even when it was being abused. I kept detailed records of everything. Not because I was planning for some future confrontation, but because that's who I am. Every property purchase, every renovation cost, every rental agreement. My accountant used to joke that I was more organized than most Fortune 500 companies. That attention to detail is what built my business from one duplex to a portfolio worth $8 million by the time Richard got sick. The diagnosis came in January 2022. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The oncologist gave him 6 to 12 months. He made it 11. Diane's response to the news was typical. She called crying, devastated, promising she'd be there for him every step of the way. And to her credit, she was around a lot in those first few weeks. But I noticed things. The way she'd steer conversations toward Richard's estate planning. The way she'd mention how expensive her rent was getting, how she was struggling. The way she'd remind him that she was his only sibling, his only blood relative besides Marcus and Helena. "She's grieving," Richard said when I mentioned it. "Everyone processes differently." But I knew better. I'd known Diane for over 30 years by then. I recognized her patterns. This wasn't grief. This was strategy. In May 2022, Richard sat me down and said he wanted to update his will. We'd made our first wills 20 years earlier, right after Helena was born, leaving everything to each other with the kids as secondary beneficiaries. Standard stuff. But now, facing his mortality, Richard wanted to be specific. I'm setting up a trust for Diane, he told me. Monthly payments, enough to live on, but structured so she can't blow through it all at once. How much? I asked. $2,000 a month for life, from the Newberry Street property rental income. That building generates enough to cover it plus maintenance. I did the math quickly. $24,000 a year. If Diane lived another 30 years, that was over $700,000. More than Richard had given her over the previous 27 years combined. That's generous, I said carefully. It's what I owe her, Richard replied. I know she's difficult. I know she's made bad choices, but she's still my sister. I can't leave her with nothing. You're not leaving her with nothing. You're giving her financial security for the rest of her life. He smiled, that sad smile he'd developed since the diagnosis. I know she's going to be angry that it's not a lump sum. I know she's probably going to contest it. But Viv, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't let her bully you into giving her more. Don't let her guilt you or manipulate you. The trust is what she gets. That's it. Everything else goes to you and the kids. You've earned it. You built your business from nothing. You've been an incredible wife and mother. I trust you to protect our children's inheritance. I felt tears burning in my eyes. I promise. We went to our attorney's office in July, 3 months before Richard died. James Chen had been our lawyer for 15 years, handled everything from property purchases to our kids' college trusts. He'd suggested we video record the will signing, given Richard's condition and the likelihood of challenges. Richard agreed immediately. I watched him that day, sitting in James's office, his body frail, but his mind sharp. He'd refused pain medication that morning specifically so there could be no question about his mental state. The video captured everything, his clear statements about why he was structuring Diane's inheritance as a trust, his explicit instructions that I would have full control of his estate, his love for our children, and his faith in my judgment. After the signing, we went for lunch at this little Italian place we'd been going to since our first year of marriage. Richard could barely eat by then, the cancer stealing his appetite along with his weight, but he insisted on keeping our traditions alive as long as possible. Thank you, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. For putting up with my family drama all these years. For putting up with me. You're not drama, I said, squeezing his fingers. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. He died on November 3rd, 2022, at home, in our bed, with me holding his hand and Marcus and Helena sitting at his bedside. His last words were, "Take care of each other." We promised we would. The funeral was 4 days later. Diane showed up in black designer clothes I knew Richard had paid for at some point. She cried dramatically throughout the service, making a scene at the burial when they lowered the casket. Marcus had to physically support her as she wailed about losing her only brother, her only family. I stood there dry-eyed, not because I wasn't devastated, but because I'd already cried myself empty in the weeks leading up to Richard's death. I'd done my grieving while he was still alive to hear me tell him I loved him. Diane's performance felt hollow by comparison. 2 weeks after the funeral, I got the first phone call. Diane, crying, saying she'd found a document in Richard's things, a handwritten note saying he wanted her to have the Newberry Street property. Could we meet to discuss it? I asked her to send me a copy. When it arrived, I knew immediately it was fake. The handwriting was wrong. Richard had distinctive penmanship, precise and slightly left-slanted from years of drafting technical documents. This signature was shaky, unpracticed. Someone trying to mimic his hand, but failing. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I took it to a handwriting expert, got a formal analysis. Then, I pulled Richard's financial records and found the real gut punch. 3 days after his death, Diane had withdrawn $47,000 from their joint emergency account, using a withdrawal slip with Richard's signature. A signature that had supposedly been written after he was already dead. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Diane wasn't just contesting the will out of grief or confusion. She was actively committing fraud, and she'd hired an attorney to help her do it. Clifton Hargrove sent his first letter in February 2023, 4 months after Richard died. It was full of legal jargon and thinly veiled threats, suggesting that a reasonable settlement could avoid protracted litigation. The reasonable settlement he proposed was $4.5 million. I forwarded the letter to James Chen, who immediately started digging into Hargrove's background. That's when we found the sealed case from 2023, the ethics violation that had almost gotten him disbarred. James couldn't access all the details due to the settlement agreement, but he had colleagues who remembered the case. Forged documents in an estate dispute. A client who'd been convinced their deceased parent had made promises that didn't exist in the actual will. It was the same playbook. And Diane had walked right into it, either because she was being manipulated or because she was desperate enough to believe her own lies. I spent 6 months gathering evidence. Every document, every bank statement, every email and text message. I had Marcus and Helena write statements about their father's mental clarity in his final months. I compiled the video of the will signing, the medical records proving Richard wasn't medicated that day, the testimony of the 3 witnesses who'd been present. And then I waited for Hargrove to make his move. I knew he'd want a face-to-face meeting, probably at a notary office to add official weight to his intimidation tactics. Men like him always underestimated women like me. They saw the gray hair, the widow's grief, and assumed fragility. They never saw the steel underneath. When the meeting notice arrived for November 15th, I knew it was time. Time to end this. Time to protect what Richard and I had built. Time to show Diane and her sleazy attorney exactly who they were dealing with. I walked into that notary office carrying 32 years of marriage, 3 decades of business experience, and every piece of evidence I needed to destroy their case. I walked in as Richard's widow, but I walked in as myself too. Vivian Ashford, businesswoman, mother, survivor. And I was done being underestimated. The week after Diane showed me that forged document, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because my mind wouldn't stop running through scenarios, planning my next moves. Richard had been gone for 2 weeks, and instead of grieving in peace, I was dealing with his sister's attempt to steal from our children. Marcus noticed first. He stopped by the house on a Wednesday afternoon, found me in Richard's office surrounded by file boxes and bank statements. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, concern written all over his face. "Research," I said, not looking up from the spreadsheet I was building. "Your aunt is claiming your father promised her the Newberry Street property. I'm documenting every conversation, every transaction, every piece of evidence that proves otherwise." Marcus sat down across from me. He looked so much like Richard in that moment. Same serious expression, same furrow between his eyebrows when he was worried. "Is this really necessary? Can't you just give her something to make her go away?" I finally looked up at him. "That property generates $96,000 a year in rental income. If I give it to her, she'll sell it within 6 months and blow through the money in 2 years. Your father set up a trust specifically to prevent that from happening. I'm not going to disrespect his final wishes because Diane is throwing a tantrum." "She's grieving too, Mom." "Is she?" I pulled up the bank statements on my laptop and turned the screen toward him. "Because 3 days after your father died, she withdrew $47,000 from their emergency account and booked a trip to Aruba. That's not grief, Marcus. That's opportunism." His face hardened as he read through the transactions. Dad told her that account was for emergencies only. He also removed her as an authorized user in 2019, which means she forged his signature on these withdrawal slips. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" "I need you and Helena to write statements about your father's mental state in his final months, specifically about the day we went to update the will. You were both there that morning before we left. You saw how clear he was. He made jokes about estate planning being more depressing than his diagnosis," Marcus remembered. "Said if we were going to talk about death, At least we should do it over good coffee. Exactly. I need that in writing, dated and signed, because Diane is going to claim he was medicated and confused. We need to prove he wasn't. Marcus nodded. I'll talk to Helena. We'll get you those statements by the end of the week. He stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. Mom? I'm sorry you have to deal with this. Dad would be furious if he knew what Aunt Diane was doing. Your father knew exactly what she'd do, I said softly. That's why he made me promise not to let her bully me into changing the will. He knew her better than anyone. After Marcus left, I called my attorney. James Chen had been at the will signing, had witnessed Richard's clarity firsthand. He picked up on the second ring. Vivian, I was just about to call you. I got a letter from an attorney named Clifton Hargrove. He's representing Diane in a will contest. My stomach dropped. When? Letters dated 2 days ago. He's alleging undue influence and questioning Richard's mental competency at the time of signing. He's asking for mediation before filing formal suit. What are our options? We fight it. We have video evidence, medical records, witness testimony. This is a frivolous claim, Vivienne. But it's going to be expensive and time-consuming. I don't care about expensive. I care about protecting my children's inheritance and honoring Richard's wishes. James was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something about Clifton Hargrove. I've been asking around, and his reputation is questionable. There was a case a couple years back, sealed settlement, but word is he was involved in falsifying documents for a client in an estate dispute. Never went to trial because the other side settled to avoid publicity. Can we prove that? Not easily. The records are sealed, but I have a colleague who was opposing counsel on that case. Let me reach out, see what he can tell me unofficially. Do it. And James? I want to hire a forensic handwriting analyst. Diane showed me a document she claims has Richard's signature promising her the Newberry property. I know it's fake. Send me a copy. I'll get our expert on it immediately. The next morning, I received my first direct contact from Clifton Hargrove. An email sent at 6:47 a.m., clearly designed to catch me off guard and vulnerable. Mrs. Ashford, it began, I understand you're going through a difficult time. Losing a spouse is never easy, and the stress of estate matters can feel overwhelming. My client, Mrs. Bennett, has asked me to reach out personally to see if we can resolve this matter amicably without the need for costly litigation. She has no desire to cause you additional pain during this period of mourning. However, she also has rights as Mr. Ashford's only surviving sibling, and certain promises were made to her that the current will does not reflect. I'm proposing we meet informally to discuss a fair resolution. I'm confident we can reach an agreement that honors your late husband's true intentions while avoiding the publicity and expense of a court battle. I look forward to your response. The condescension in every sentence made my blood boil. The assumption that I was too grief-stricken to fight back, too overwhelmed to see through his manipulation. I forwarded the email to James without responding. His reply came within minutes. Don't respond. Let me handle all communication from here forward. But Hargrove wasn't done. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 4 more emails, each one escalating in tone. The third one came with an attachment, a formal demand letter outlining Diane's claim to $4.5 million in equitable distribution of Richard's estate. $4.5 million, nearly a third of everything Richard and I had built together. I called Helena that night. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with stress. Mom, Aunt Diane's been calling me. She's saying you're trying to cut her out of Dad's will entirely, that you manipulated him when he was sick. She's crying and saying she's going to end up homeless. Helena, listen to me carefully. Your father left Diane a trust that pays $2,000 a month for the rest of her life. That's $24,000 a year, guaranteed. She will never be homeless unless she chooses to be. She says that's not enough to live on. The median household income in Massachusetts is $65,000. She's getting $24,000 for doing absolutely nothing, plus whatever she earns from actually working. That's more than generous for someone who's never held a job for more than a year. Helena was quiet. Then she said, "She told me Dad promised her the Newberry Street building. He didn't. She has a forged document that she's trying to pass off as your father's handwriting. I'm having it analyzed by an expert." "Mom, I want to believe you, but what? You think I'm lying about your father's wishes? You think I manipulated him?" The hurt in my voice was real. "No, God, no, Aunt Diane sounds so convinced, so desperate, and I know she and Dad were close. They were, which is why he took care of her. But he also knew her, Helena. He knew that if he left her a lump sum, she'd destroy herself with it. The trust is protection, not punishment. I need you to trust me on this. I need you to trust your father." I heard Helena take a shaky breath. "Okay, I trust you. And Mom, I'm sorry I doubted you. Don't apologize. Diane's good at manipulation. She's had 52 years to perfect it." The handwriting analysis came back a week later. The expert's report was damning. Not only was the signature on Diane's document forged, but the paper itself was wrong. Richard had used premium linen stationery for all his personal correspondence, a specific brand he'd ordered from a shop in Cambridge for 20 years. The document Diane presented was printed on standard office paper, the kind you buy at Staples. The ink was wrong, too. Richard exclusively used fountain pens, had a collection of vintage Watermans that he'd inherited from his father. The signature on Diane's document was ballpoint pen, and not even a good one. The expert could see hesitation marks where someone had tried to mimic Richard's distinctive left-slanted script and failed. I sent the report to James, who forwarded it to Hargrove with a pointed note. "Your client has presented fraudulent documents. Recommend you reconsider your position immediately." Hargrove's response came the next day, and the condescension was gone, replaced by aggression. "Mr. Chen, your client's attempt to discredit my client through hired experts is exactly the kind of bullying behavior we intend to highlight in court. Mrs. Bennett has every right to contest a will that was clearly executed under duress. The fact that Mrs. Ashford is now attacking her credibility only reinforces our position that she wielded inappropriate influence over Mr. Ashford during his final months. We will be filing formal suit by the end of the week. I suggest your client prepare for a very public examination of her conduct." That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from rage. The audacity of threatening me, of suggesting I'd manipulated Richard when I'd spent 32 years being his equal partner, when I'd built my own fortune independent of his, when I'd held his hand through every moment of his cancer treatment and listened to him plan his children's future with his final breaths. The formal lawsuit arrived on a Friday afternoon. Marcus was visiting, helping me sort through Richard's clothes to donate. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find a process server holding a manila envelope. "Vivienne Ashford?" he asked. "Yes." "You've been served." I took the envelope, signed his clipboard, and closed the door. Marcus appeared in the hallway. "What was that?" I opened the envelope, pulled out the complaint. 23 pages of accusations. Undue influence. Mental incompetence. Suspicious timing, requests for depositions, document production, medical records, and at the end, the demand, invalidate the will, distribute the estate according to Massachusetts intestacy law, which would give Diane a substantial portion as Richard's only surviving sibling. "Your aunt is suing me," I said, my voice eerily calm. Marcus took the papers, read through them, his face getting redder with each page. "This is insane. Half of this is outright lies. She's claiming Dad was on heavy pain medication when he signed the will. We were there that morning. He specifically went off his meds so he'd be clear-headed. She's banking on us not having proof. She doesn't know about the video. Can we show it to her? End this now?" I shook my head. "Not yet. If we show our cards too early, she'll just adjust her strategy. We need to let her commit fully to this lie first." Let her make sworn statements and depositions about Dad being medicated and confused. Then, we destroy her credibility in one move. Marcus looked at me with something like awe. You're scary when you're strategic. I learned from the best. Your father didn't build a successful consulting business by showing his hand too early. Over the next month, Hargrove's harassment intensified. Requests for documents, interrogatories, demands for depositions. He wanted access to Richard's medical records, our financial statements, emails between Richard and me during his final year. He was fishing, trying to find anything that could support Diane's narrative of manipulation. James fought every overreach, but we still had to produce mountains of paperwork. I spent hours in my home office, printing bank statements, copying property deeds, compiling evidence of my independent wealth. I wanted the record to show beyond any doubt that I'd never needed Richard's money, that our marriage was a partnership of equals. In March, Diane called me directly. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Vivian, please," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Can we just talk? Just the two of us? Without the lawyers?" "What do you want to talk about, Diane?" "I want you to understand where I'm coming from. Richard was all I had. My whole life, he was the one person who never gave up on me. And now he's gone, and you have everything, and I have nothing. You have a trust that pays you $2,000 a month for the rest of your life. That's not enough. Do you know how expensive it is to live in this city? I can barely afford my apartment on that. Then get a job, Diane, like everyone else in the world. I'm 52 years old, Vivian. Who's going to hire me? Someone will if you actually try. But you won't try because you've never had to. Richard always bailed you out, and now you think I should do the same." Her tears dried up immediately, replaced by venom. "You're heartless. You always were. Richard deserved better than a cold, calculating woman who only cared about money. If I only cared about money, I would have married someone wealthier. I built my own fortune, Diane, something you've never understood because you've never built anything in your life." She hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone, shaking with anger and hurt. Because despite everything, despite her greed and manipulation, she'd been part of my family for over 3 decades. And it hurt to have it end like this. The deposition was scheduled for April 12th. James prepared me for 3 days, running through potential questions, coaching me on how to stay calm under Hargrove's provocations. But I didn't need much coaching. I'd spent 30 years in business negotiations. I knew how to keep my composure. The deposition took place in Hargrove's office, a cramped suite in a mediocre building near South Station. Diane was there, sitting next to her attorney, refusing to make eye contact with me. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Part of me felt bad for her. The rest of me remembered the $47,000 she'd stolen. Hargrove started with softballs, my background, how I met Richard, our marriage. Then he shifted. "Mrs. Ashford, isn't it true that you maintained separate finances throughout your marriage?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that you built a substantial real estate portfolio independently?" "Yes." "So you didn't need your husband's money?" "No, I didn't." "Then why did you insist on being the sole beneficiary of his estate?" James started to object, but I put my hand on his arm. "I didn't insist on anything, Mr. Hargrove. Richard made that decision himself. He wanted to ensure our children's inheritance was protected and that his sister would have guaranteed income for life without the ability to squander it. Those were his words, not mine. How convenient that there's no one alive who can contradict you. Actually, there are 3 witnesses who were present at the will signing, all prepared to testify to Richard's mental clarity and explicit instructions. Would you like their contact information? Hargrove's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Ashford, my client has provided documentation showing that your husband promised her the Newberry Street property. How do you explain that?" "I explain it as a forgery, a bad one. The handwriting expert's report is in the record. Your client forged my husband's signature, and now she's trying to commit fraud to steal from her own niece and nephew. Diane shot to her feet. I'm not a thief. Richard promised me. He told me I'd be taken care of. Sit down, Mrs. Bennet, James said calmly. He did take care of you, I said, my voice steady. He left you more money than he owed you, more than you deserve, and you're throwing it away because you can't accept that Richard loved his children more than he loved enabling your dysfunction. Hargrove called for a break. Diane rushed out of the conference room crying. I sat there perfectly calm while James squeezed my shoulder. That was risky, he whispered. It was true, I replied. When we resumed, Hargrove changed tactics. Mrs. Ashford, did your husband use pain medication during his final months? Yes, when he needed it. Opioids? Yes. Isn't it true that opioids can cause confusion, impaired judgment? It can, yes. So your husband's mental state was compromised? No. On the day he signed his will, he deliberately went off all pain medication 12 hours beforehand, specifically to ensure he was completely clear-headed. His medical records confirm that. There were no narcotics in his system. Hargrove paused, flipping through his notes. He hadn't expected that answer. How do you know there were no narcotics in his system? Because he had routine blood work done that morning at his oncologist's office. The lab results are dated July 18, 2022, at 9:47 a.m. The will was signed at 2:30 p.m. The toxicology panel shows zero presence of opioids, benzodiazepines, or any other mind-altering substances. Would you like me to provide copies? The color drained from Hargrove's face. He looked at Diane, who had gone completely still in her chair. They hadn't known about the blood work. They'd built their entire case on the assumption that Richard had been medicated and confused, and I'd just proven he was neither. No further questions, Hargrove said quietly. We left that deposition with Diane's case in shambles, but I knew Hargrove wouldn't give up easily. Men like him didn't admit defeat. They doubled down, got more aggressive, tried to bully their opponents into settlement. I was ready for whatever came next, because I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for Richard's memory, for his final wishes, for the legacy he wanted to leave our children. And I would burn Diane's fraudulent case to the ground before I let her take any of that away. 3 weeks after the deposition, James called me with news that changed everything. I heard back from my colleague, the one who opposed Hargrove in that sealed case from 2023, he said, his voice tight with controlled excitement. He can't give me official documents because of the settlement agreement, but he remembers the details. And Vivian, it's worse than we thought. I sat down at my kitchen table, my coffee going cold in my hand. Tell me. Hargrove represented a woman claiming her deceased mother had promised her the family home. He presented what looked like a legitimate codicil to the will, handwritten, signed, dated. The opposing side was about to settle when someone noticed the paper had a watermark from a manufacturer that didn't exist until 2 years after the mother's death. He forged it. He and his client together, most likely. They got caught. The case was headed for criminal charges when Hargrove's firm offered a massive settlement and agreed to conditions. He was supposed to be suspended for 3 years, but somehow the suspension was deferred pending good behavior. My colleague suspects money changed hands with the Bar Association Disciplinary Board. My mind was racing. Can we use this? Not directly, the records are sealed. But here's the thing. The deferral had conditions. Any whiff of similar conduct, any hint of ethical violations, and the original suspension kicks in immediately, plus new charges. He's supposed to be on his best behavior. But instead, he took Diane's case, knowing her document was forged. Exactly. If we can prove he knowingly presented fraudulent documents, we can get him disbarred and potentially charged criminally. And Vivian, there's more. My colleague did some digging into the Bar Association records, the public ones. Hargrove has had 6 complaints filed against him in the past 4 years, all dismissed or settled quietly. but the pattern is clear. What kind of pattern? Estate disputes, always representing the family member claiming they were promised something not in the will, always presenting questionable documentation, always settling before trial when scrutiny gets too intense. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He's running a scam. That's my guess. He finds desperate people like Diane, people who feel entitled to inheritances they're not getting, and he helps them fabricate evidence. Then he pushes for settlement, takes his percentage, and moves on before anyone looks too closely. Diane might not even know she's being used. James was quiet for a moment. Does that change how you want to proceed? I thought about that. Thought about Diane, 52 years old and desperate, falling into the hands of a predatory attorney who saw her as just another payday. Part of me felt sympathy. The rest of me remembered her forging Richard's signature to steal $47,000. No, I said finally. She chose to lie about what Richard promised her. She chose to commit fraud with that bank withdrawal. Hargrove might be manipulating her, but she's not innocent. We proceed as planned. There's one more thing. The Bar Association investigator in the 2023 case, she's still active. Her name is Patricia Moreno. My colleague thinks she'd be very interested in knowing Hargrove is back to his old tricks, especially since this case involves fraudulent signatures and a vulnerable client being coached to commit perjury. Can you reach out to her? Already did, unofficially. She wants to see our evidence. Send her everything. The handwriting analysis, the bank fraud documentation, copies of Hargrove's threatening emails. Everything. Vivian, if we do this, it's going to get ugly. Hargrove will know we're coming after his license. He might get desperate, try to pressure Diane into more aggressive tactics. Let him try. We have the video, James. We have incontrovertible proof that Richard was lucid and explicit about his wishes. Whatever Hargrove does, we can counter it. All right, I'll contact Moreno officially tomorrow and provide everything we have. This is going to move fast once she opens an investigation. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, watching the afternoon light fade through the windows. Windows in the house Richard and I had bought together 30 years ago, when Marcus was still a toddler and Helena was just a dream we were planning for. Every room held memories. Richard teaching the kids to ride bikes in the driveway. Family dinners at the table where I was sitting now. That terrible Christmas when he tried to cook the turkey and set off every smoke detector in the house. He'd loved this house, loved our family, and Diane was trying to take it apart piece by piece. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Ashford, this is Clifton Hargrove. I think it would be beneficial for us to meet privately, without counsel present. There are settlement terms I'd like to discuss that might be more favorable than what I've previously proposed. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I stared at that text for a full minute. He was getting nervous. James must have been right about the Bar Association investigation moving quickly. Hargrove could sense the walls closing in. I forwarded the text to James with a single word. Interesting. His response came immediately. Do not respond. Do not meet with him. This is an attempt to get you on record without my presence. Classic intimidation tactic from someone who knows their case is falling apart. I deleted Hargrove's text and blocked the number. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the video of Richard's will signing one more time. I'd watched it dozens of times over the past months, but it never got easier. Seeing him so thin, so obviously dying, but still so determined to protect his family. I know my sister is going to contest this, he said on the screen, looking directly into the camera. I know she's going to claim I was confused or manipulated, but I want it on record, clearly and unambiguously. Vivian is the best thing that ever happened to me. She's been my partner, my equal, my best friend for over 3 decades. Everything I have, she helped me build. And everything I'm leaving to her and our children is theirs by right, not by manipulation. Diane gets the trust because I love her, despite everything, but she gets only the trust because I also know her, and I'm protecting her from herself, even if she'll never see it that way. I closed the laptop, blinking back tears. Richard had known, had anticipated every move Diane would make, every accusation she'd throw at me. And he'd prepared for it, documenting everything, making his intentions crystal clear. 2 days later, James called again. Patricia Moreno opened a formal investigation into Clifton Hargrove this morning. She's requesting all case files from the past 5 years, interviewing previous clients and opposing counsel. And she's specifically interested in our case because of the bank fraud element. How long before he finds out? He probably already knows. The Bar Association would have sent him notification. Vivienne, I think he's going to try to force a settlement meeting. He needs to close this case fast before the investigation uncovers more. What if I refuse to settle? Then he either withdraws from representing Diane, leaving her without counsel and likely destroying her case, or he pushes forward and risks everything when we present the video evidence in court. When's the next scheduled meeting? Settlement conference at the notary office, November 15th, 3 weeks from now. The judge ordered it before we go to trial. November 15th. Almost exactly 1 year after Richard died. The symmetry felt deliberate, like the universe was giving me a chance to close this chapter on the anniversary of losing him. I'll be there, I said. And James, I'm bringing the laptop. I want to show them the video in person. I want to watch Diane's face when she hears her brother explain exactly why he didn't trust her with his money. James was quiet for a moment. That's not going to leave any room for settlement. You know that, right? Once you play that card, it's scorched earth. Good, I said, because I'm done being diplomatic. I'm done tolerating accusations and threats from a woman who's been leeching off my husband for 30 years. Richard asked me to protect our children's inheritance, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. All right then, James said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Let's end this. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing, not just gathering documents, though I did that too, but mentally preparing for what was coming. I knew that confrontation at the notary office was going to be brutal. I knew Diane would cry, would beg, would probably say terrible things about me and Richard both. And I needed to be ready to stay strong through all of it. Marcus and Helena were both planning to come, but I told them no. This was something I needed to do alone. This was my promise to Richard, my final act of protecting what we'd built together. They didn't need to see their aunt at her worst, didn't need to witness the family imploding. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moment in the conference room when I'd play the video, when Richard's voice would fill the space and Diane would have to hear the truth she'd been denying for a year. Part of me dreaded it. Part of me couldn't wait. At 3 a.m, I got up and made tea, sat in Richard's office, surrounded by his books and his awards and the photos of our family. There was one from our 20th anniversary, both of us laughing at something Marcus had said right before the picture was taken. Richard looked so healthy then, so alive. 5 years before cancer would steal him from us. I'm going to keep my promise, I said to the empty room, to the memory of him that lingered in every corner. I'm going to protect them. All of them. Even Diane. Even if she hates me for it. The morning of November 15th came cold and gray. I dressed carefully, professionally. The burgundy suit I'd worn to close my biggest real estate deal. The pearls Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look strong, capable, unshakable. I picked up my leather portfolio, the one Richard had given me, and checked its contents one more time. The handwriting analysis, the bank fraud documentation, the medical records, the witness statements, and the laptop with the video queued up and ready to play. Everything I needed to destroy Diane's case and protect my children's future. I walked out my front door into the cold November morning, ready for war. Walking into Morrison & Associates that morning felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The glass door was heavier than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of what I was carrying. A year of grief, a year of fighting, a year of defending Richard's memory against his own sister's greed. Diane saw me first. I watched her expression change through the glass, watched that smug confidence settle over her features like a mask. She crossed her arms, leaned back in that burgundy chair like she owned the place, like she'd already won. "Vivienne," she said when I walked in, drawing my name out with barely concealed contempt. "I didn't think you'd actually show up. Thought you'd send one of your fancy lawyers to handle the dirty work." I didn't answer. Didn't give her the satisfaction. Just kept walking, my heels clicking on the marble floor, my portfolio tucked under my arm. The same portfolio Richard had given me 20 years ago, worn now, but still beautiful, still mine. Clifton Hargrove stood up when I entered, extending his hand with that oily smile. He was wearing the same kind of suit as before, charcoal gray and slightly too tight, reeking of cologne that probably cost more than it was worth. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "I'm glad we could arrange this meeting. I think we can resolve this matter quickly if we're all reasonable." There was that word again. Reasonable. As if I was being unreasonable by defending my husband's explicit wishes. As if protecting my children's inheritance was somehow an overreaction. I shook his hand briefly, felt the damp nervousness of his palm, and sat down across from them. The receptionist had already disappeared, probably warned to stay out of what was coming. "I appreciate your optimism, Mr. Hargrove," I said, setting my portfolio on my lap, "though I'm curious what you consider reasonable." He launched into his prepared speech about compromise and family harmony, about avoiding costly litigation and preserving Richard's memory. It was all performance, all calculated to make me feel guilty for not just handing over millions of dollars to a woman who'd already stolen from my husband's estate. I let him talk, let him think he was controlling the conversation, and then I interrupted him. "You mean the forged document claiming Richard promised Diane the Newberry Street property?" Diane's face flushed red immediately. Guilty people always react too quickly. "It wasn't forged," she snapped. "Richard told me himself, 3 weeks before he died. He said what exactly?" I kept my voice level, my eyes locked on hers. "That he was leaving you a commercial property worth $1.2 million while cutting out his own children? That sounds like Richard to you?" She started to respond, started to spin some story about guilt and promises, but I'd heard enough. I'd spent a year listening to her lies, and I was done. That's when Gerald Morrison walked out of his office. I saw him glance down at the paperwork on the reception desk, then look up. Our eyes met, and I watched recognition dawn on his face. Watched shock replace professional courtesy. Mrs. Ashford?" His voice came out strangled, higher than normal, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Is that you in person?" The entire office went silent. That humming copy machine in the corner seemed to pause. Even the traffic noise from the street outside faded. I saw Diane's smile falter, saw her eyes dart to Hargrove with the first hint of panic. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," I said calmly. "Yes, I thought this matter deserved my personal attention." Morrison stammered something about being right with us, then disappeared back into his office. I could hear him making a phone call, his voice urgent but muffled. Diane and Hargrove exchanged another look, and I saw it clearly now. Fear. They were starting to realize they'd miscalculated. "You know him," Diane said, and it wasn't a question. Her voice had lost some of its edge, some of its confidence. "Mr. Morrison and I have worked together for years," I replied. "He's handled the documentation for several of my properties, the Beacon Hill townhouse, the commercial space in Cambridge, that medical building in Brookline that generates $42,000 a month in rental income." I let that detail sit there between us. Let Diane absorb the reality that I'd built an empire she knew nothing about, that Richard had been right to trust me with everything. Hargrove tried to recover, tried to redirect the conversation back to his talking points about settlements and compromises. but I was done listening. Your client withdrew $47,000 from a joint account she shared with my husband, I said, opening my portfolio and pulling out the first bank statement. 3 days after Richard died, using documents with his signature. Would you like to explain how a dead man authorized a bank withdrawal? The color drained from Diane's face. She started stammering about emergencies and funeral expenses, but we both knew the truth. I had the credit card statements showing her 2-week trip to Aruba, had the timeline proving she'd stolen that money before Richard's body was even cold. Morrison emerged from his office and gestured toward the conference room. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd realized what this meeting actually was. Not a settlement conference, an execution. We filed into the small conference room with its mahogany table and worn chairs. Morrison took his seat at the head, spreading out Hargrove's paperwork with obvious reluctance. He wouldn't look at Diane anymore. Mr. Morrison, Hargrove began, trying desperately to regain control. As I explained on the phone, we're here to contest the validity of— I know why you're here, Mr. Hargrove, Morrison interrupted, his voice firm now. But I need to inform you that Mrs. Ashford's reputation in this city is beyond reproach. I've personally witnessed her business dealings for over a decade. She's never once been involved in anything questionable. Diane shot to her feet. This isn't about business dealings. This is about family, about Richard's wishes, about her manipulating my brother when he was dying. Something broke inside me then. Not fragile and shattering. Something hard and cold and absolute. 3 years of holding back, of being diplomatic, of tolerating her insinuations and accusations, all of it crystallized into focused rage. Your brother, I said quietly, standing to face her across the table, spent 32 years protecting you from yourself. Every failed business, every bad relationship, every time you needed money because you couldn't hold a job for more than 6 months. He gave you cash, paid your rent, covered your credit card debt. Do you know how much he gave you over the years, Diane? She pressed her lips together, arms crossed defensively. $273,000, I continued. I found the records in his office after he died, notes in his handwriting, Diane's car payment, Diane's rent, Diane's divorce lawyer. 27 years of bailouts, and you know what he never did? What? She whispered. He never told me to stop her from coming around, never complained about the money. He loved you, despite everything. But he also knew you, Diane. He knew that if he left you a lump sum, you'd blow through it in 2 years and end up worse off than before. Diane's face crumpled, but I wasn't finished. The Newberry Street property generates $96,000 a year in rental income, I said. Richard's will established a trust that pays you $2,000 a month for the rest of your life. $24,000 a year, guaranteed, that you can't gamble away or lose to another con artist. That was love, Diane. Real love. Protecting you even after he was gone. And you threw it back in his face by trying to steal from his children. Hargrove shuffled his papers, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Ashford, while that's all very touching, it doesn't address the question of mental competency when the will was modified. I opened my laptop, the moment I'd been preparing for. Morrison leaned forward, interested. Even Diane uncrossed her arms, her attention fixed on the screen. You want to talk about mental competency? I turned the laptop toward them and pressed play. The video started with Richard sitting at our attorney's desk. The date stamp was clear in the corner, July 18, 2022. 4 months before he died. He was thin, the cancer having stolen so much of his weight, but his eyes were alert, clear, completely present. This is Richard Ashford, he said to the camera, his voice weak but steady. I'm here of sound mind and body, or as sound as stage 4 pancreatic cancer allows anyway. He smiled then, that crooked smile that I'd fallen in love with 37 years ago. I felt my throat tighten, but kept my face neutral, my eyes on Diane. I'm modifying my will today to make absolutely certain that everything I own goes to my wife, Vivienne, and our children, Marcus and Helena. I know my sister Diane is going to contest this. She's probably already planning her lawsuit, knowing her. Diane made a small sound, almost a whimper. Hargrove had gone completely still. Richard shifted in his chair on the screen, wincing slightly from pain. Our attorney James appeared briefly in frame, asking if he needed water. Richard waved him off. Diane's been calling me constantly, visiting every day, talking about how I need to take care of family. What she means is, she wants money. She always wants money. And I've given it to her, God knows I have. But I've also watched her destroy every opportunity, every relationship, every chance at stability she's ever had. If I leave her a large sum, she'll burn through it in a year, maybe 2. And then what? Then she'll have nothing. I watched Diane's face as she heard her brother's words, watched tears start streaming down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of humiliation, of being exposed. I'm leaving Diane a trust that pays monthly, Richard continued on the screen. Enough to live on, not enough to destroy herself with. Everything else goes to Vivienne because she's the strongest, smartest, most capable person I've ever known. She'll protect our children's inheritance. She'll make sure Marcus and Helena have what they need. And she'll do it because that's who she is, not because I'm asking, because that's how she's wired. He looked directly into the camera then, and I could see the pain in his eyes. Not physical pain, the emotional cost of what he was saying about his own sister. Vivienne, if you're watching this, it means Diane did exactly what I knew she would. It means she's contested the will, probably claimed you manipulated me, probably tried to make you feel guilty for following my wishes. Don't let her. You promised me you'd protect our kids, and I know you will. I love you. I've loved you since the day we met in Chicago, and I trust you completely. The video ended. The conference room was silent, except for Diane's quiet sobbing. Hargrove was staring at his hands, his face pale. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. That doesn't prove anything, Diane finally said, her voice breaking. He was medicated. You coached him. The medical records are attached, I said, pulling out another document and sliding it across the table. Blood work from that morning. No narcotics in his system. He specifically asked to be clear-headed for the signing. There are 3 witnesses, all prepared to testify. The video has metadata showing the date, time, and location. Would you like to keep going? Hargrove stood abruptly. I need to consult with my client privately. Sit down, Mr. Hargrove. My voice was ice. We're not done. He looked at Morrison, who gestured firmly for him to sit. The attorney sank back into his chair, and for the first time, he looked genuinely worried, scared even. I pulled out the final document. This is a report from the Massachusetts Bar Association's Disciplinary Board. Are you familiar with case number 2023 DL4477? Hargrove's face went white. Actually white, like all the blood had drained from his body. It involves an attorney who falsified documents in an estate dispute in 2023, I continued. Forged signatures on a codicil to make it appear the deceased had changed their mind about asset distribution. The case was sealed as part of a settlement agreement, but there are people who remember it quite well, people who are very interested in the fact that you're doing it again. I don't know what you're talking about, Hargrove said, but his voice cracked. The attorney's name was redacted in public records, but the case details match perfectly. The law firm was Hargrove and Associates. That's your firm, isn't it? Morrison was staring at Hargrove now, disgust clear on his face. You accepted a case based on a forged document, Mr. Hargrove, I said. The signature analysis proves that Richard's signature on Diane's document was created after his death, which makes this fraud. And given your history, the Bar Association investigator Patricia Moreno is very interested in reopening their investigation into your conduct. Hargrove's hands were shaking now. You contacted the Bar Association? I provided them with all the evidence, the forged signature, the bank fraud, your threatening emails, everything. Ms. Moreno opened a formal investigation 3 weeks ago. I imagine you'll be hearing from them officially very soon. If you haven't already. Diane shot to her feet so fast, her chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor. You're lying. You're making all of this up to... To what, Diane? I stood too, facing her across the table. To keep money that's already legally mine? To protect my children's inheritance from their aunt who's trying to steal it? Richard left you $2,000 a month for life. That's more than he owed you. More than you deserve. And you're throwing it away because you can't stand the thought of me having what I worked my entire life to build. Her face crumpled completely. He was my brother. He was my husband, I said softly, and I felt tears burning in my own eyes for the first time that day. And I loved him more than you'll ever understand. I held his hand when he died, Diane. I watched him take his last breath, and his final words were, take care of each other. Not give Diane whatever she wants. Not let her steal from Marcus and Helena. Take care of each other, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Morrison cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. I believe this meeting is concluded. Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Hargrove, unless you have substantial evidence to counter what Mrs. Ashford has presented, I cannot in good conscience proceed with contesting this will. The document you've provided is clearly fraudulent, and the video evidence is irrefutable. Hargrove was already gathering his papers, his hands trembling so badly he kept dropping pages. Diane just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her entire body shaking. I'll destroy you for this, she whispered. No, Diane, I said, my voice steady despite the tears I could feel threatening. You'll go home. You'll accept the trust Richard set up because he loved you, and you'll stay away from my children. Because if you don't, if you make one more move against this family, I will file criminal charges for the bank fraud, and then you won't get the trust. You won't get anything except a criminal record and possibly jail time. Do you understand me? She didn't answer, just grabbed her purse and stumbled toward the door. Hargrove followed, not even bothering to finish collecting his papers, desperate to get out before I dropped any more bombs. Mr. Hargrove, I called after him. He froze at the door. Patricia Moreno asked me to tell you she'll be in touch. She has questions about 6 other cases you've handled with similar patterns. You might want to get a good attorney, one who's actually ethical. He fled. Actually fled, practically running through the reception area and out the glass door. Through the window, I could see him and Diane standing on the sidewalk, her shouting at him backing away with his hands up. Morrison and I sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said quietly, I've been a notary for 35 years. I've seen a lot of estate disputes. But I've never seen someone come that prepared, that controlled. Your husband chose well when he trusted you. Thank you, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I needed to keep my promise to him. You did more than that. You protected his memory. That video, what he said about you, that was love, Mrs. Ashford. Real love. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I closed my laptop, gathered my documents back into my portfolio, and stood on shaking legs. Will she accept the trust? Morrison asked. She doesn't have a choice, I said. It's take the trust or get nothing. And Diane might be a lot of things, but she's not stupid enough to choose nothing. I walked out of that conference room, through the reception area, and out into the cold November air. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through my system. But I'd done it. I'd kept my promise to Richard. I'd protected our children. I'd won. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. How'd it go, Mom? I smiled through my tears and typed back, It's over. I'll tell you everything over dinner. Bring your sister. We have a lot to celebrate. As I walked to my car, I glanced back at the notary office one last time. Through the window, I could see Morrison at his desk, shaking his head. probably already drafting his official report closing out Diane's fraudulent case. I got in my car and just sat there for a moment, letting it all wash over me. The grief, the relief, the exhaustion, the triumph. A year of fighting, and it was finally over. For the first time since Richard died, I felt like I could finally breathe. The official notification came 2 days later. A single-page document from Diane's new attorney, someone from a reputable firm who'd clearly reviewed the evidence and advised her to withdraw all claims immediately. No apology, no explanation. Just a formal statement that Mrs. Diane Ashford Bennett was retracting her contest of Richard Ashford's will and accepting the terms of the trust established in her name. I sat in Richard's office reading that document, and I felt something release in my chest. Something I'd been holding tight for a year, maybe longer. The weight of defending him, of fighting for him when he couldn't fight for himself. It was over. Marcus and Helena came over that evening. I made Richard's favorite dinner, the lasagna recipe I'd perfected over 30 years of marriage, the one he always requested for birthdays and anniversaries. It felt right somehow to honor him this way. "So Aunt Diane just gave up?" Helena asked, twirling pasta on her fork. "Just like that?" "Not quite," I said. Her attorney withdrew from the case after the Bar Association opened their investigation. She had to find new representation, and the new lawyer took one look at the evidence and told her she had no case. She could either accept the trust or walk away with nothing. "What about the money she stole from the bank account?" Marcus wanted to know. "She's repaying it in monthly installments, as ordered by her new attorney. $500 a month until the $47,000 is fully returned. It'll take her almost 8 years. Helena shook her head. "I can't believe she did all this. I know she and Dad had a complicated relationship, but I never thought she'd actually try to steal from us." "Your father knew," I said quietly. "That's why he structured the trust the way he did. He knew Diane would be angry, would probably contest it. But he also knew she'd lose if she tried. He protected you both, even from beyond the grave." Marcus raised his wine glass. "To Dad, who knew his family better than we gave him credit for." We clinked glasses, and I felt tears burning in my eyes. Good tears this time. Healing tears. "What about that lawyer?" Helena asked. "Hargrove. What's going to happen to him?" "James heard from Patricia Moreno last week. They're moving forward with disbarment proceedings. Turns out our case opened a floodgate. 6 other former clients have come forward claiming Hargrove encouraged them to fabricate evidence in estate disputes. He's facing criminal fraud charges on top of losing his license." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "People like that prey on vulnerable people. Aunt Diane might have been wrong to do what she did, but he enabled it, made it worse." I agreed, though part of me still felt complicated about Diane's role in everything. She was an adult who'd made her own choices, but Hargrove had definitely exploited her desperation, her grief, her lifelong pattern of feeling entitled to things she hadn't earned. "Have you heard from her at all?" Helena asked carefully. "Once," I said. "She sent a letter. Not an apology exactly. More of an explanation. She said she felt abandoned when Richard died, that she'd lost her only family. She said the trust felt like an insult, like Richard didn't trust her." "Did you respond?" "No, because she was right. Richard didn't trust her with money. He loved her, but he didn't trust her. And nothing I say is going to change how she feels about that." Marcus set down his fork. "Are you okay, Mom? I mean, really okay? This past year has been brutal." I thought about that question. Was I okay? I'd lost my husband, fought a year-long legal battle with his sister, spent countless sleepless nights gathering evidence and preparing for confrontations. I'd cried more than I'd thought possible, felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "Some days are harder than others, but I kept my promise to your father. I protected you both, protected what we built together. And that matters. That helps." Helena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We're so proud of you. The way you handled everything. The way you stayed strong even when Aunt Diane was saying horrible things about you. Dad would be proud too. He told me once that I was stronger than I gave myself credit for, I said, remembering that conversation. It had been about 6 months before he died, on a day when the pain was particularly bad. He said when he was gone, I'd surprise myself with how capable I was of handling everything. I told him I didn't want to find out, that I wanted him to stay. And he said, I know, love, but life doesn't care what we want. It just keeps moving, and you'll move with it, because that's who you are. We sat in silence for a moment, all of us missing him. Then Marcus cleared his throat. I have news, he said. Professional news. I got offered a partnership at the firm. They want me to head up the new Sustainable Architecture division. Marcus, that's wonderful. I stood up and hugged him. Your father would be so excited. He always said you had the best design sense of anyone he knew. There's more, Marcus continued. Sarah and I are getting married, in the spring. We wanted to wait until all this legal stuff was settled before we made it official. Helena squealed and launched herself at her brother. I felt my heart swell with joy and grief all mixed together. Richard would miss this. Would miss walking Marcus down the aisle, would miss the grandchildren that would hopefully come someday. But he'd prepared for this too. Had made sure Marcus and Helena would have the financial security to build their own lives without worrying about money. Had trusted me to protect their inheritance so they could pursue their dreams. We'd like to have the wedding here, Marcus said, gesturing around the house. In the backyard, if that's okay with you. This is where Dad proposed to you, right? We thought it would be a nice way to honor him. He proposed to me right next to the rose bushes, I said, tears streaming down my face now. Said he wanted to surround me with beautiful things because that's what I deserved. It was the corniest, most wonderful moment of my life. Then that's where we'll do it, Marcus decided. Right next to the rose bushes. Dad can be there in spirit. We spent the rest of the evening planning, talking about the future instead of dwelling on the past year's pain. It felt good, felt like healing. After they left, I walked through the house Richard and I had shared for 30 years. So many memories in every room. Our first piece of furniture, that terrible couch we'd bought at a garage sale and somehow made last 15 years. The dining table where we'd hosted countless family dinners. The office where Richard had built his business and I'd managed my properties. I ended up in our bedroom, sitting on his side of the bed. His nightstand still had his reading glasses, the mystery novel he'd been reading when he got too sick to focus. I hadn't moved them, hadn't been ready. But maybe I was ready now. Maybe it was time to start letting go of the grief and holding on to the love instead. I picked up the glasses, folded them carefully, and put them in the drawer. The book I placed on the shelf with his other favorites. Small steps, but steps forward. My phone rang. James Chen. Vivian, I wanted to give you an update. The Bar Association formally suspended Clifton Hargrove today. 3 years, no possibility of early reinstatement, and the district attorney's office is filing fraud charges for the forged documents. He's looking at possible jail time. How many clients came forward? 11 so far. Patricia thinks there might be more. He's been running this scam for at least 6 years, maybe longer. You bringing him down probably saved dozens of families from going through what you went through. I hadn't thought about it that way, hadn't considered that fighting back against Diane and Hargrove might help other people too. Thank you, James, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have, he said gently. You're one of the most formidable people I've ever met, Vivian. You would have found a way. I just helped make it easier. After we hung up, I walked out to the backyard. The November evening was cold, but the stars were brilliant. Richard and I used to sit out here sometimes, late at night when the kids were asleep, just talking about our dreams for the future. I kept my promise, I said to the night sky, to wherever Richard was. I protected them, all of them, even Diane. She'll have that trust for the rest of her life, whether she appreciates it or not. Marcus and Helena are safe. The business is safe. Everything you worked for, everything we built together, it's protected. The wind picked up, rustling through the bare tree branches. It almost sounded like an answer, like Richard saying he knew, that he'd always known I would keep my word. I went back inside, locked the doors, turned off the lights. Tomorrow, I had a property showing in Cambridge, a potential new acquisition that could add another $30,000 a year to my portfolio. Life was moving forward, just like Richard had said it would. 3 months later, I passed Morrison and Associates on my way to a business lunch. I saw Gerald Morrison through the window, working at his desk. He looked up, recognized my car, and waved with genuine warmth. I waved back. The story had spread quietly through Boston's professional community. Not as gossip, but as a cautionary tale. Don't underestimate the widow. Don't assume grief means weakness. Don't mistake dignity for fragility. Richard would have laughed at that, would have made some joke about me being scarier than his oncologist, which is exactly what he'd said once during his treatment. Marcus and Sarah got married in May, right next to the rose bushes. Helena was maid of honor, and she cried through the entire ceremony. I cried too, but they were happy tears mixed with sad ones, wishing Richard could be there, grateful that he'd prepared us so well for his absence. At the reception, Marcus gave a toast. To my father, who taught me that real strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about knowing who you are and standing firm in that knowledge. And to my mother, who proved that lesson true every single day of this past year. We love you, Mom and Dad. Wherever you are, we love you too. I raised my glass with everyone else, feeling Richard's presence in every detail. The flowers he'd loved, the music he'd chosen for our own wedding, the family he'd built and protected with every decision he'd made. Diane wasn't there. She'd been invited, had been offered an olive branch one last time, but she'd declined, sent a card with a generic congratulations message and nothing else. Maybe someday she'd understand what Richard had been trying to do for her. Maybe she never would. Either way, I'd kept my promise. Had protected her from herself, just like Richard asked. As the sun set over the backyard and the string lights came on, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Peace, not the absence of grief, but the presence of something else. Acceptance, gratitude for what we'd had, pride in what I'd protected, hope for what was still to come. Richard was gone, but his love remained, in Marcus's architectural brilliance, in Helena's compassion as a doctor, in the empire we'd built together, in the strength I'd discovered I had all along. I'd kept my promise. And in keeping it, I'd found myself again. The widow who refused to be underestimated. The businesswoman who built her fortune with her own hands. The mother who protected her children's future. The wife who honored her husband's memory by staying true to everything he'd believed in. I was all of those things, and I was enough. More than enough. Richard had known that all along.